Hey heroes, and welcome to another incredible episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. In a way, this week's tale begins billions of years ago at the dawn of the Marvel Universe as we know it. Amidst the death of the previous incarnation of reality and the Big Bang that ensued, a number of geological artifacts survived and scattered across the burgeoning universe. One such stone landed on the planet Kree-Lar, where it was discovered several millennia ago by the alien Kree. As the Kree studied the artifact, they split it into two halves, which became known as the Alpha and Omega Stones. Doing so unleashed forces of order and chaos that killed thousands, but this caught the attention of several other races who had discovered similar artifacts. Putting aside their wars and rivalries, scientists from each of these various races came together to embark on an ambitious endeavor, arranging the various geological artifacts into a device called the Lifestone Tree. One of these stones, later known as the Bloodgem, served as a conduit for an interdimensional nexus point of magical energies called the Hellfire Helix. The Lifestone Tree accessed these other dimensional energies, channeled them through the Alpha and Omega Stones, and into an array of 8 smaller stones, causing each one to manifest facets of the classical elements and other fundamental forces of the universe. This power was then used to artificially advance the evolutionary traits of 8 chosen individuals, each from a different race. These individuals, known as the Chosen 8 of Fate, effectively became an ancient incarnation of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and were active for roughly 200 years due to their increased longevity. Notable among them for today was a Kree woman named Ajes'ha, who was empowered by the fundamental force of gravity. Eventually, however, the time of these Guardians came to an end as each member either died in combat, passed away from old age, or simply retired. Without them, the peace they fought for eventually dissipated, and the Kree attempted to keep the Lifestones out of the wrong hands by moving them off of Kree-Lar, with one account indicating that they planned on destroying the Alpha and Omega Stones in the heart of a distant sun. In any event, the ship carrying the Lifestones never reached its intended destination, as it was attacked by intergalactic pirates en route. At the same time, one of the vessel's own crewmen attacked his fellow Kree in an attempt to claim the Alpha and Omega Stones for himself. However, he proved incapable of handling the raw power of the gems, and this confluence of circumstances not only destroyed the Kree vessel, but caused its warp drive to implode, creating a fissure in space that scattered the broken pieces of the now shattered gems across the galaxy. And as luck would have it, a spatial anomaly at the edge of our solar system caused a number of these fragments to land either on or near the Earth. One in particular, a chunk of the gravity-powered stone wielded by Ajes'ha, landed on the blue area of the moon, where it remained for thousands of years. We'll come back to that in a bit, but for the next part of our story, we shall turn our attention to a young girl named Karla Sofen. Born in Los Angeles, California, more specifically in Van Nuys, Karla's parents, Karl and Marion Sofen, were live-in servants who worked for a wealthy Hollywood producer named Charles Stockbridge. As such, she grew up living in a Hollywood Hills mansion, watching her father wait on his employers hand and foot, while the Stockbridges lived a lavish life of luxury. Unsurprisingly, Karla's jealousy turned to resentment, which wasn't helped by the fact that she was expected to be a companion to Stockbridge's similarly aged daughter, Deanna. Now, Deanna seemed to mean well as she attempted to befriend Karla. However, Karla considered Deanna stupid and gullible, and made a habit of manipulating her emotions for her own benefit. Then Karla's life changed forever when her father died of a heart attack at the age of 42. The Stockbridges decided to hire a new pair of live-in servants to replace him, and while they offered the Sofens a place to live on the estate, Marion Sofen declined, instead deciding to move back in with her parents in Van Nuys. After that, Marion was determined to ensure that her daughter lived a better life than she did, and regularly worked multiple jobs to pay for Karla's education. Karla, however, grew increasingly selfish and manipulative, and began studying psychology to learn how to better control other people. The efforts of both women ultimately paid off as Karla graduated from college and earned her PhD in psychology, filling her mother with pride. Karla, however, felt nothing but contempt for her mom, as she had come to believe that putting anyone else's needs before your own was sheer idiocy. She subsequently moved to Chicago, Illinois, where she opened her own private practice. Business was slow at first, but over time her practice became quite successful, at least financially, as she prolonged her patients' treatments for as long as possible, often by secretly worsening their conditions in nefarious ways. As a result of this undiscovered malpractice, half a dozen of her patients wound up institutionalized, while another 8 ended up taking their own lives. But now we will turn our attention back to Ajes'ha's Lifestone, which by this point had been retrieved from the moon's blue area by American astronauts and subsequently brought to a Midwestern university for study. It remained there until a thief from Frederick, Colorado named Lloyd Bloch was hired by an eccentric European collector to steal the university's moonstones. This burglary was interrupted by a pair of armed security guards, one of whom was inadvertently killed by Bloch in the ensuing scuffle. As Bloch attempted to escape, the second guard fired on him, hitting the blue gemstone in his hand. This confluence of circumstances caused the Moongem's dormant power to reactivate. It merged with Bloch's body, endowing him with superhuman abilities, and he subsequently slew the remaining guard with a powerful laser beam fired from his hand. Of course, Bloch was completely unaware of the gem's origins and simply assumed that there was something unique about his own body chemistry that interacted with it. Now, I will note that because the stone was found on the blue area of the moon where the Watcher Uatu resided, it was once believed that the Moongem's origins were in some way related to his vast cosmic powers, but that was before its connection to the Lifestone Tree was revealed. In any event, Lloyd Bloch decided to use his newfound abilities for financial gain, and donned an armored suit to become a costumed criminal known as Moonstone. Hoping to strike it big, he joined forces with the corrupt advertising mogul Quentin Harderman and his costumed business partner Jordan Strike, aka Jordan Dixon, aka the Viper. Financially backed by a subversive organization known as the Secret Empire, those two led a group called the Committee to Regain America's Principles, and used this position to run a smear campaign against Captain America. As part of this, Moonstone killed his unwitting fellow operative John Keane, aka the Tumbler, and framed Captain America for the crime before battling and overpowering Cap himself. Things progressed from there, with Moonstone gaining popularity in the media, while at the same time the Secret Empire furthered their plans to take control of the United States. The whole situation came to a head when the Empire launched an attack on the White House, during which Moonstone feigned defeat against them in an attempt to demoralize the citizenry and encourage the country's leaders to surrender to the Secret Empire. In the end, however, Captain America and the Falcon joined forces with the X-Men and S.H.I.E.L.D. to thwart this scheme. Furthermore, Moonstone's true allegiance was publicly exposed, and he ratted out Harderman's committee for good measure. Lloyd Bloch was then jailed in a special cell that negated his superhuman abilities, and so for the next part of our tale we turn our attention back to the cynical and selfish psychiatrist Dr. Karla Sofen. While her business did relatively well thanks to her manipulative and highly immoral practices, she nonetheless grew to despise relying on the mentally unstable for income. Craving even more power and control over others, she sought out fellow psychiatrist Johann Fenhoff, better known as the criminal mastermind Dr. Faustus. For a time she learned from him while aiding his criminal activities, one of which involved them recruiting an airliner full of mobsters to threaten New York City with stolen Stark weaponry. This plan was thwarted before they even really reached the city, as Captain America found them by happenstance, and while Faustus ended up getting ejected from the plane in the ensuing conflict, Karla Sofen narrowly avoided detection by hiding in an overhead storage compartment. Furthermore, thanks to a web of underworld contacts she made while working under Faustus, Sofen learned of Lloyd Bloch's Moonstone. With that, she concocted a new scheme and offered to treat Bloch as a psychiatrist, only to secretly dose him with hallucinogenic gas and use hypnotic techniques that she'd learned from Faustus to convince Bloch that the Moonstone was mutating him into a deformed monster. As a result, she was able to manipulate him into separating from the gem, allowing her to claim it for herself. The trauma of all of this left Lloyd Bloch depowered and in a state of psychosis, and he was subsequently institutionalized. Karla Sofen, meanwhile, usurped his code name and became the new Moonstone. Like her predecessor, she gained superhuman strength, the ability to fly, the power to fire bursts of energy from her hands, and the ability to phase through solid objects. In her quest for power, she allied herself with a criminal organization known as the Corporation on the West Coast. While secretly working with them, she infiltrated the military facility Gamma Base by volunteering to work with the Hulk's psychiatrist, Dr. Leonard Samson. She attempted to use this opportunity to steal top-secret equipment to sell back to the corporation, which led to a confrontation with the Hulk when he stumbled upon her. Between her powers and her ability to manipulate and confuse others with her words, Moonstone initially held her own against the Green Goliath, but she soon realized that her strength, while considerable, was no match for his. During this battle, General Thunderbolt Ross also saw Karla when her powers briefly waned, but then she succeeded in pushing Ross into suffering from a nervous breakdown, making it seem as though the Hulk had attacked him when Doc Samson arrived. While she successfully maintained her cover, she was subsequently recruited by Senator Eugene Kleeger Stevak, who was secretly the head of the corporation's East Coast Division. For a time, she basically worked for him as hired muscle, standing beside him as he abducted the Hulk's ally Jim Wilson in a scheme to control the Hulk. This was a goal that was shared by Kleeger's rival, the West Coast Corporation's leader, Curtis Jackson, later known as the Power Broker. However, Jim Wilson was also the Falcon's nephew, and so the whole situation culminated in a battle involving the Corporation, Moonstone, Captain America, the Falcon, the Hulk, and Quasar, who was known at the time as Marvel Man. While the Corporation's agents initially gained the upper hand against the heroes, the tide of battle inevitably turned, and Moonstone cut and ran before she could be apprehended. Kleeger, meanwhile, was killed by Jackson, effectively ending Moonstone's association with the Corporation. On top of that, when the Corporation itself was dealt a crushing defeat soon thereafter, leaving the organization defunct, Moonstone's reputation as a costumed criminal seemed to go down with it. Still hungry for power, she subsequently attempted to boost her abilities by stealing a device called the Enervator, which was developed by Dr. Kurt Connors to manipulate cellular energy levels. However, she was thwarted by the spectacular Spider-Man, who actually saved her life since the unstable Enervator exploded not long after it was separated from her. As a result of that battle, Dr. Karla Sofen was arrested and imprisoned for the first time. But sometime thereafter, she and two other costumed criminals, Whirlwind and Scorpion, were freed by the supervillain Tiger Shark. As it turns out, Tiger Shark was working for the criminal genius Elias Starr, aka Egghead, who brought them together to form a new incarnation of the Masters of Evil, a group traditionally associated with Baron Zemo, and used them in a scheme to strike at his old enemy, Hank Pym, the original Ant-Man, by framing him for treason and forcing him to join them. Egghead also employed the Radioactive Man, the Shocker, and the Beetle in this scheme, but when the Avengers intervened to save Pym, Egghead was seemingly killed by Hawkeye. Moonstone, meanwhile, accepted that she was outmatched and surrendered to the Avengers, testifying on Pym's behalf in exchange for a plea deal that gave her a lighter sentence. As part of this deal, she was sent to the Alternative Energy Research Facility Project Pegasus, where her energy powers were studied, but not long afterwards the facility was attacked by a subterranean race known as the Lava Men. Amidst the chaos, Moonstone was freed by another inmate, a Dark Force-empowered criminal named Blackout. The two joined forces, however, the situation quickly erupted into a battle involving the Avengers, Spider-Man, Electro, and the Rhino, during which Blackout and Moonstone took their opportunity to flee. They attempted to lay low in a rundown building in the South Bronx, and Moonstone intended on manipulating Blackout for her own purposes with drugs and hypnotic techniques, but before she could capitalize on this, they were tracked down and attacked by the Avengers. Moonstone tried to use Blackout's Dark Force abilities against the heroes, but in the end, Blackout, still groggy from being drugged, inadvertently sent both himself and Moonstone into the Dark Force dimension. The two criminals resurfaced some weeks later, emerging on the Earth's moon, where Karla hoped to find more gems like the one that had already empowered her. However, not only were the Inhumans and their ally Quicksilver living there at the time, but they were also being visited by the mutant songstress Dazzler, who had the ability to absorb sonic vibrations and convert them into light energy. Suffice it to say, by combining this power with the Inhuman King Black Bolt's ability to generate immensely powerful shockwaves with his voice, Dazzler and Quicksilver made fairly short work of Moonstone and Blackout. Of course, that was far from the end of Karla Sofen's criminal career, and after a subsequent attempt to turn the general public against the Avengers, she was recruited into Baron Helmut Zemo's Masters of Evil. She also convinced Zemo to free Blackout from Project Pegasus, where he had once again been imprisoned, still intending on using him as a pawn. However, Zemo didn't trust the ambitious Moonstone, and with help from his ally, the Fixer, usurped her control over Blackout. With a small army of supervillains at his command, Zemo launched an infamous attack on Avengers Mansion and even succeeded in taking control of it for a time in what is known as the Under Siege incident. As a result of this, Moonstone ended up clashing with the superhuman Avenger Monica Rambeau, known at the time as Captain Marvel. Upon realizing that Rambeau's energy abilities were powerful enough to kill her, Moonstone frantically tried to escape, but in her panic inadvertently slammed into a rocky cliffside so hard that she was left hospitalized with a broken neck. She later escaped from the hospital and got involved with an attempted theft of Stark technology in Brazil, which ironically led to another defeat at the hands of Captain Marvel. Unfortunately for her, because she hadn't fully recovered from her previous injuries, this battle left her in even worse shape than before with seemingly permanent damage. To fully explain what happened next, we need to briefly turn our attention to the fire-powered woman Marcia Rosenberg, aka Volcana. Now, her story is somewhat complicated, but the important thing for today is that she was previously in a close relationship with the matter-manipulating superhuman Owen Reese, also known as the Molecule Man, who had secretly imparted onto her a portion of his cosmic abilities. After that, there was an incident in which Volcana got into a battle with the tech-based villain The Wizard, during which her old friend Roxanne Arnold, or Annie, was injured by the fleeing crowd. Feeling tremendously guilty about this, Volcana followed her friend to the hospital and unknowingly used the cosmic energy she received from the Molecule Man to cure her, along with everybody else in the hospital. This included Dr. Karla Sofen, who assumed that her own powers were responsible for her recovery. She quickly got into a conflict with the authorities as they attempted to prevent her escape, but Moonstone was ultimately subdued by Volcana and arrested once again. This time she was imprisoned in the Colorado-based superhuman holding facility, the Vault, where she subsequently participated in an attempted mass breakout that was ultimately thwarted by the Avengers and the government-sponsored mutant team Freedom Force. Meanwhile, there was more than one instance of Moonstone being plucked from somewhere around this time and forced to participate in larger interdimensional conflicts. One incident involved a multiverse-hopping mad scientist named Corona who pulled Moonstone and other villains forward in time to face off against the Avengers and a team of heroes from a distant cosmos known as the Justice League. In another incident, it was a version of the Egyptian wizard known as the Sphinx who recruited her and other Lifestone wielders to participate in a contest against his own future self. Okay, long story short, the Sphinx was also empowered by one of the Lifestones, in his case one called the Ka Stone, and so he wanted to obtain godlike power by obtaining a second stone from his older counterpart. In this conflict, Moonstone clashed with the Nova Richard Rider, but ultimately joined forces with him and the others to stop the Sphinx from rewriting their reality, and in the end she was returned to her proper place in time. In the meantime, in the years since being left in a state of psychosis, the previous Moonstone, Lloyd Bloch, underwent extensive therapy and treatment to regain a semblance of sanity. In the midst of this, he met a fellow patient who had rediscovered a method of endowing an individual with ionic superpowers, the same process that had previously been used to empower the notorious Magiadon Count Lucino Nefaria. After eventually being released, Lloyd Bloch underwent this process himself, becoming even stronger than he was as Moonstone. Seeking vengeance on Carla Sofen, he donned a duplicate of Count Nefarious' supervillain costume and rechristened himself Nefarious. But while Nefarious was far stronger than Moonstone, she was still significantly smarter, and was able to use manipulation and seduction to stall him until Captain America and Quasar arrived to help take down Nefarious. Although in the end it was Moonstone who dealt the finishing blow by firing simultaneous energy blasts into both of his ears. She surrendered peacefully after that, but either escaped or didn't wind up in jail right away. She briefly joined an army of supervillain women called the Femizons, during which time she clashed with Captain America and the mercenary Paladin. She also attended a weapons expo hosted by Advanced Idea Mechanics, which resulted in a conflict involving Captain America, the Falcon, and the Master of Kung Fu Shang-Chi. In any event, she did ultimately wind up back in the vault, where she was apparently a model prisoner, and the guards even allowed her to use her cell's holographic image inducers to simulate a tropical beach, and I'm sure nobody involved in that decision had any ulterior motives whatsoever. During her stay in the vault, she was attacked by Nefarious once again, but this time she was rescued by a team of Avengers including Black Widow, Hercules, Giant Man, and the Vision. In the midst of that conflict, Moonstone nearly escaped by turning on her saviors, but the Black Widow convinced her to surrender once again in exchange for ensuring that Nefarious was kept far, far away from her. Now, I will note that sometime later Nefarious sought revenge on Moonstone once again, but that time he didn't even get close as he was killed by his namesake, Count Nefaria, who drained the ionic energy from Lloyd Bloch's body. In the meantime, there was an incident in which the Avengers and the Fantastic Four disappeared, seemingly having sacrificed themselves to defeat the psionic monstrosity known as Onslaught. In the wake of that, Baron Zemo concocted a scheme in which he and his villainous allies would pose as heroes and fill the void left behind by the missing ones, with he himself adopting the identity of a World War II-era hero, Citizen V. He first used this identity to foil a mass breakout attempt at the vault alongside his allies Songbird, formerly Screaming Mimi, and Atlas, formerly the original villainous Power Man. In the midst of that, however, he had the Fixer and the Beetle retrieve Karla Sofen. Now before that, she actually intended on serving out the rest of her sentence, but now that she was a fugitive again, she agreed to join Zemo's new team. Wanting a name for this team that initially sounded heroic but nonetheless harkened back to his Nazi origins, Zemo named this new group the Thunderbolts. And, needing a new heroic identity for this grift to work, Dr. Karla Sofen redesigned her costume and renamed herself Meteorite. But if you want to know what happened next for her, well, you'll just have to let me know in the comments, because that is all I have for you this week. But thank you so much for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. Oh, also, I never bring this up, but you can also watch new videos ad-free over there. Anyway, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments, but that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!